Hi, I'm Charmi Narayan. I am a senior editor at Nature Neuroscience. We are at the 79th Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory Symposium on Quantitative Biology, and this year's topic is cognition. And today I'm joined by Adam Gazzaley, who's at UCSF. And Adam, you're going to tell us how to improve the brain. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah, so over the years, we've done a lot of basic cognitive neuroscience research into understanding what aspects of how our brains work are fragile to interference and how it gets worse as we get older. And then around 5 years ago, I started getting frustrated just by sharing the bad news that our brains just decay without anything we can do. And so we became inclined to see if we can use the tools and the methodology that we have developed to understand the brain and sort of turn it around on itself and see if we could use it as a means of improving how the brain processes information.
So before we sort of get into the sort of work that you're doing, what are sort of the existing methods that people might already have tried to try and ameliorate sort of, say, the deficits associated with aging, or even just to improve normal functioning?
Yeah, there's a pretty broad landscape of approaches. I guess the classic is education, and that should be discussed because that's the mainstay of boosting how our brain operates. But other approaches that have gained some interest is pharmaceuticals. So drugs that are really targeted at deficits associated with, let's say, Alzheimer's disease, and really work at the neurotransmitter system level, have been at least considered and applied as approaches to improve cognition in people that are healthy or people that are older. So you see a lot of that. And then there's the general field of cognitive training. And I would say that or at least what we've been doing in our lab is related to that, but maybe with like a little bit of a different spin on it.
So do you mean related to cognitive training in particular is the sort of work you're doing?
Exactly.
So again, before we move on to that, what are sort of some of the problems you have with, say, pharmaceuticals, for example? Why should we be looking at cognitive training rather than popping a pill?
Yeah, in general, the pharmaceutical approach to enhancing how our brain functions has come up pretty short. And it's not just even in terms of cognition, it's pretty much all of the uses of pharmaceuticals for the broad range of neurological and psychiatric diseases. They haven't worked very well. Some people are entirely not impacted by them at all, or they mostly get side effects and a small effect. And it's generally because the pharmaceutical approach is a pretty blunt one. We can act on neurotransmitter systems, but we can't really act on circuits.
Right.
And so you wind up having to go to very high doses to get effects, and then you get lots of side effects.
I see.
So there hasn't been a very satisfying pill that really corrects these problems.
I see. So it's the pharmaceutical approach is not at all targeted. It's sort of a big hammer.
Exactly. It's a sledgehammer, and I think that the burden of the side effects is just so great from all of the uses of pharmaceuticals that the field has been sort of reeling from that, both as a sort of industry point of view and then from the healthcare side, that we don't really have a good means of impacting the brain functionally across all of these conditions.
So what does cognitive training do? How does it work, and how do you actually do it?
Yeah, so the general concept is that unlike the drug approach, which at least up until today doesn't have the ability to activate a circuit, interacting with a targeted environment, which might be in the form of a training program, in our case in the form of a video game, activates a circuit, because that's how the brain works. When you interact with something selectively, the brain acts in such a way. And so the idea is that by activating that circuit and then constantly challenging it by using adaptive algorithms, such that, at least this is our approach, such that as you get better, the difficulty scales with you. So it keeps pushing on the system until it changes. Not so far removed from the concept of physical exercise and repeating a movement until the muscle gets stronger. And so that's the general idea, that it has the selectivity because the interaction activates a circuit, and then you can move it based on the fact that our brains are plastic and that they modify themselves at many different levels in response to a challenge.
So what kind of circuits have you been able to get at? How do you sort of isolate a particular circuit using this sort of training?
Yeah, so that's how we dip back into our more basic science work in the cognitive domain, and try to understand what systems are vulnerable, and then what how we might design interaction to really challenge that. So when it comes to the older population, we know that there's a lot of deficits in the realm of cognitive control. So the abilities that allow us to interact with the environment based on our goals. So selective attention, interference, processing, multitasking, distraction resistance. And so our goals would work on prefrontal cortical systems, and to challenge them in this way, to have our older adults engage in a task that had a lot of distraction and a lot of challenges and demands from other tasks, and really push the type of abilities that we think they're actually most sensitive to.
And so what do these training paradigms actually look like? So if I was to sit down and do one, what would I see?
Yeah, we have many different ones now. The one that we've recently had success on and just had a paper last year was called NeuroRacer. And you'd basically be in a 3D environment. So you'd be traveling through and trying to, in this particular game, maintain a car that you're driving on the road, which is quite difficult using a joystick. So it turns to the left, right, you're going up a hill, down a hill. And while that's going on, signs come up. And you have to respond as rapidly and accurately to your target sign. So you have these two tasks that are both very attentionally demanding, occurring at the same time. And they're both independently adapted. So as you get better at them, they're constantly getting faster and more difficult. And your rewards really only occur when they both get better. And so the whole mechanics of the game prevent you from trading off and really push you to do what's actually incredibly hard to do over time, and see if you get better at it.
I see. So you both speed and accuracy is sort of important in this game.
Yep.
And I imagine people obviously would get better at playing this game, but do you see you see generalized benefits? So what sort of tasks would people be getting better at after playing this game?
So the hypothesis was that cognitive control abilities, like I described to you, have some underlying mechanistic similarities and commonalities. And that if we improve the ability to deal with multiple tasks, which we know is quite a challenge to older adults, we'd see benefits in those other cognitive control abilities that they're deficient in. And that's what we were able to show. So on a very different task to what they were trained on, a working memory task, which is essentially holding an image of a face in mind for several seconds, even if that face is interrupted by something else during the task, we show that can improve, that did improve by the group that trained, and as well as a vigilance task, basically a sustained attention task, also very different. A boring, repetitive task to identify a rare target also improved as well. So that was quite encouraging to see two skills that were not explicitly trained in the game improve in the training group and not in two control groups that were also in part of the study.
And what is the extent of these improvements? So, for example, you start with an older adult. Do they start sort of resembling in their performance someone who is much younger?
They do. They resemble in their performance 20-year-olds. They really get a lot better, and neurally they start resembling them. So we use EEG recordings here as an outcome measure, pre and post, and we show that a measure of prefrontal cortical activity, known as midline frontal theta, that's engaged and sort of bursts right at the most challenging part of a game, a third of a second after a sign comes up when you're also driving, is deficient in 60, 70-year-olds compared to 20-year-olds before the game, and then after the game it's really not any different. So we could see it both neurally and behaviorally, sort of a renormalization of a lot of these patterns.
That's very impressive. So this is a 60-year-old's brain, which is looking more like a 20-year-old's after. And how much training does it take, and how long would the benefits last?
Yeah, so in this study, it was 12 hours of training. So it was 1 hour a day, 3 days a week for a month.
Right.
And the only thing we tested was after 6 months playing the game itself, which is actually pretty challenging, as I described, that the multitasking level, so not just how they did on the two tasks, but how they actually did the two tasks at the same time, did not decline 6 months later, which was pretty shocking to see, without a booster at all.
Yeah.
And so had we known that, which actually we didn't expect that would happen, we would have done a more detailed analysis to see what else remained. And so those are some of the studies we're doing now to try to understand that retention of skill over such long periods of time.
So this is a great sort of introduction to my final question. So what sort of future work are you planning, and where do you think this sort of technology and this effort will lead to?
Yeah, so we have a lot going on. We have a lot of new games that target different cognitive processes. Some, for example, one an NIH-funded study focused on a different type of distraction, internal distraction. So it uses the principle of concentrative meditation and then integrates it with the video game dynamics of adaptivity and feedback, as we did here. And so you get this sort of internal video game. And so we'll see if that has benefits on older adults. We're moving into different populations. So children in development, and see if we could help, especially developmental disorders and things like ADD, through collaboration, moving in lots of different clinical populations. So mostly I do that through advising. So depression, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, dementia. So it's exciting to see if there's impact in other populations. And then what we're really working on hard, really in a deep way in our lab, is to see if we can have the adaptivity of the video game be guided by more than just their performance on the game as it is now. We think that that's really the special ingredient to all of this, is this closed loop approach, that as you get better, the game gets more challenging. And so the idea is, how about if the game doesn't just know how you're performing, but knows what's going on in your brain? Maybe even looking at aspects of how your brain is acting that's not even clearly represented in behaviors. And so the goal is to get real-time EEG recordings and then feed those signals into the game mechanics. So in essence, the game could diagnose the deficits in how your brain processes information in real time and then guide the adaptivity and the feedback to target those processes. So we think that the video game is not, it's not a magic trick. It basically activates the circuit, but then we could use other aspects to really boost those effects even further.
It sounds completely fascinating, Adam. Thanks so much for talking to me.
My pleasure. Thank you.